Welcome back to the channel. So last time we made this governor catch arm or cutout arm here to grab the push rod. So today we're going to take this pile of metal here and turn it into the rest of the governor system. Okay, to start with on the governor, we're going to start with this governor weight yoke here. So this is out of steel, and it's just got to put it in the lathe and this drill, probably ream, because it needs to be a slide and fit on this crankshaft. Ream a hole through the middle, and then cut these grooves in here. Just a parting operation. Just plunge that in, move it over, and cut these grooves, and then part it off. I've got this piece of steel here that we'll make that out of. We'll turn the OD first to the right size, and then drill it, ream it, cut the grooves in it, and then part it off. So that should be pretty straightforward. The other piece that I want to work on is this governor weight yoke here. So this is actually the piece that holds the governor arms or governor weights that we'll make later. So this will bolt to the back of the flywheel. So it will slide over to here. There'll be two screws. So this will get drilled and tapped. Once we get those holes drilled in it, that'll get screwed to this piece here. And then the arms will stick through. They will pivot on those pins, and then the arms will stick through here with the weights on it and the springs, and then that's the governor system. And then the other end of the arms will hook into the spool valve that we're going to make out of this piece of steel here. And then the other slot in the spool valve goes into this catch arm here. So these weights is what actually moves this back and forth, and our spool valve slides back and forth on the crankshaft. So this piece, it says to make it out of steel, but I'm going to make it out of brass. There's no real stress on this part. I think it'll be easier to make it out of brass. And I've got some brass to use. So the way it's shown here is it's 5 different pieces. There's 4 different little arms here, and then there's a base piece here, and then there's the holes where this will get bolted onto the flywheel. But in order to make this, I'm going to do it a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily show how to make it in the plans. It doesn't actually show a solder joint anywhere. But I assume that they plan on you soldering these pieces into this. It doesn't actually show a slot that might just be soldered on top of it. I'm not sure. But the way I'm going to do it is the same way. I made a similar piece on the Farm Boy engine, a similar piece to this to hold the governor system. So my plan is to use this round piece that I've got here to make this base, what I'm going to call a base plate here. So we'll turn this down to the right OD, but we're not going to drill and machine and bore this hole in the middle until afterwards. So then what I'm going to do is actually machine 2 slots into the base, and then I'm going to make these arms as one solid piece on each side. So it'll be down, and then there'll be a little bit of a flat, and then back up. We'll go ahead and drill these holes and get our spacing right on that. So then what we can do is actually set these arms down into the 2 slots, and then we can put a pin in here, and then we'll put a 1/4 inch spacer to keep our spacing correct. And we'll actually put a pin in here on both sides to keep that perfectly aligned, to keep these holes aligned, because that's important that we need to keep these 2 holes on each side aligned, and then we need to keep the 1/4 inch spacing on there. So then we'll actually solder that into the slots that we make. And then once that's done, we're not going to part it off yet from this. We're going to actually use this to hold it. Then we will put it back in the lathe, and then we will bore and machine out this center here, which will bore and machine out these arms at the same time. So it'll leave us with our radius here, and then it'll just remove this entire center section. but everything will still be in alignment, and then these 4 pieces, it'll turn the 2 into 4, and then they'll be soldered to this base piece, and then we'll know that our holes and everything is aligned and our spacing's right. And then before we actually solder that in here to machine this section out here, we'll probably put it on the rotary table and just machine out this section here and here and leave these little nubs that we can round off. Got a 5/32 radius here on the end, and we'll go ahead and drill our holes when we're set up there. But we'll start in the lathe and get the overall, the OD right to what we need here, which is our 15/32 plus another 5/32 on each side. So we'll get that done, and then, like I say, set it up in the mill, machine these slots, and then we'll make these arms here, solder them in, and then part the whole thing off. And then once that's done, we can transfer our holes to the back side of our flywheel here and go ahead and drill and tap that and get bolted on. But we'll get started with the spool piece first and get that set up in the lathe and start machining on it. Okay, that was a lot of machining, so I'll get you caught up here. Started on this spool valve and turned it down to the right OD, and then cut these grooves in here. This is just a plunge operation, and move over and plunge and cut the width that we needed both of these grooves here, and then drilled it and reamed it. So this will fit on the crankshaft, and it needs to be a good sliding fit on here. And then the other end here, this end goes on our governor catch lever that we made earlier, goes into that slot like that. So we'll tighten that up there. So as this moves back and forth, it will move this catch lever, and then once the push rod is open here, then it'll move in and catch our little piece here, and that'll hold the exhaust valve open. And this other groove here is what the weights, the actual governor weights attached to. They go in this groove, and then as they move, that's what moves this spool valve or whatever you want to call it. This is controls that. So, and then that, once it moves in, we'll pop this out here and open that lever. So the other piece that I made is the beginning of the rest of the governor system. So started with, we made these pieces here, and this is one, started out as one solid piece. So I laid this out, and then I got the holes from the center. We know how far the holes are on each side, and then from the bottom, we know how far the holes are up. And then marked those points, and then drilled these 4 holes so that we know that they're in the correct location. And then laid the rest of this out, and then bandsawed it out, and then cleaned it up with the die filer. And then this piece was attached to our big chunk that we had here earlier. So first thing I did was went in and I know how far from the front here, how thick that we need this, so I plunged and made a groove just to make some relief. And then I laid out a line here in the center, and then marked from the center, we know how far these holes are here, so that I could drill these 2 holes. Then I put this in the milling machine, and then we drilled these 2 holes, and then I took the end mill and plunged in, and then turned the rotary, put it in the rotary table, turned the rotary table to machine down this outside here to the correct dimension. So I still need to do some cleanup and kind of around these edges here on the end. But then once I had that oriented, then I knew how far to move over to machine these grooves. So I did this with an 1/8 inch end mill. And then I cut these grooves so that we had a 1/4 inch space in here between the 2 arms here. And then I plunged down about half the thickness of this. So then I was able to put these arms in here, and then I used a couple of drills as pins, and then I had some 1/4 inch wide spacers. Then we could clamp all of this so that we know that this spacing ends up at a 1/4 inch. And we know that these holes are in alignment with each other because we had the drill bits in there lining everything up. So once all of that was lined up, then I was able to solder both of these in. And I did use the Harris paste flux, and it worked really good this time. So I got a real good joint there. It's good and strong. I still need to clean everything up with the file. It's just, as the way I machined it and soldered, I hadn't done any cleanup yet. So after that, all that was done, back to the lathe, and then we plunged a hole here in the middle, started with a center drill, went with a 1/4 inch drill, and then a 1/2 inch end mill. And then this ended up at 9/16, and I just went ahead and you can use a boring bar and bore this out, but I just went ahead and used a 9/16 end mill. So that essentially makes this into 4 individual pieces and cuts this out, cuts it in half on each side in the middle. But it's still soldered in there, it's still good and strong, and then everything is still aligned. I like doing it this way because getting all 4 of these lined up at the same time, you could use a pin, but then the weight of it, it's gonna want to try to kick over, and getting this clamped down and secured to get it soldered, to get everything lined up, would be much more difficult. But it could be done the other way. The only thing that I did mess up, I got the holes in the correct location, but I got off on my angles here. I planned for this angle to be much steeper and actually meet this edge here, and then the inside should have come in and then right to the edge of where this cleaned up. So I noticed that before I soldered them, and I started to remake these pieces, but I actually kind of like the way that this looks. Functionally, there's nothing wrong with it. Like I say, the holes are in the correct location, the correct spacing, and the correct distance up. And there's a lot of material that's left here that's soldered into there, so it's plenty strong enough. And like I say, I kind of like the way that that looks and the way that it turned out. So that's what we're going to go with. So this will fit. This is the flywheel on the governor side, and this is on the inside. So that is a good tight fit on there. So this will orient like this, where these 2 bosses are. And that puts these arms in the center of these spokes on each side. So we'll need to transfer these holes and drill and tap this and get this piece bolted onto there. So that's what that's going to look like. But I want to go ahead and make the rest of these arms so that we can stick them in there and make sure that we're completely centered up between these spokes before we drill those holes. And that looks pretty good right there, but I still want those arms in there to make sure that it's completely centered up, because if you're a little bit off on one side, then the arms can hit on this flywheel on this webbing here. So we want to make sure we got that centered up. So let's just slide this on here and see what it's going to look like. Put the key back in here. So we'll determine the final location once we get everything together. I know that these arms need to clear this piece here, so that's probably about where it'll ride at. So this is spinning around all the time with these arms attached to it, and then the one end of the arm, like I say, is out here with the weight and the springs, and the other end of the arm goes into this spool valve, and as they move together or farther apart, that's what moves this valve, or moves this spool valve back and forth, which controls this lever. So that's a good progress on that. Good place to stop for this week. And next time, like I say, we'll continue on building the rest of this governor arm system, and then we can kind of get all this placed where it's going to be. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching.